I just want to introduce you quick to Dr. David Warren. He serves as the secondary principal at Calvary Baptist Academy in Midland, Michigan. And he is also the discipleship pastor at Calvary Baptist Church. So busy man, double dipping, double the fun probably right now in the switch over to everything digital. He's married to Maria, and they have 4 children, 2 twin-year-old daughter and son, Kirsten and Brendan, and a 13-year-old Carson. And then I don't know if it was the surprised blessing or not, but the 3-year-old Grayson. So big spectrum there, and 4 kids. Obviously, Dr. David has a lot of experience with his own family that he is able to share with us today. So Dr. David, thank you for being with us, and we're excited to have you here. And for some reason, I don't know what you guys can see, my video is not letting me put the our picture full screen. So I apologize about that. But I'll turn it over to you, Dr. David, here, and let you take it.
Sure. Thanks, Josh. Well, I don't know where you're coming from, but probably if your house is anything like mine, if you have children at home, the last couple of weeks have been a little different than the norm. As a high school principal, we actually headed into our most recent week of school 2 weeks ago, and we were moving along, and actually we were intending on Friday of that week to have a fine arts festival. So we were going to host about 1,000 students, and they were going to do strings and bands and choirs and speech numbers and all of those things. And on Wednesday, it became apparent that we needed to discuss whether or not we could still host that event. And at that time, we were going to, but overnight, things changed rapidly, and we felt like we were in a position we needed to cancel the event. And so we had no school that Friday, and okay, we'll come back Monday. And for us, we had a day off, an extra day because of the festival. We gave our students that Monday off. And in that time frame, of course, schools shut down in our state. But we're a one-to-one school, so we have Chromebooks for all of our students. And so we're doing remote distance learning. And suddenly became very much aware of how much screen time was going to be taking place, of course, for educational purposes, but then entertainment purposes. And with a 3-year-old, my wife is a teacher. So she was preparing videos for lesson plans, and she's doing Google Hangouts meets with her students a few times a week just to make sure everybody's on the same page, getting everything up on what we use a platform, Google Classroom. So suddenly she's spending a ton of time doing that, and we have a 3-year-old at home, and I'm monitoring and helping the other teachers, and also I teach a few classes. And so really had that realization we need to be on top of things around the devices and have lots of families asking questions. And that's where this webinar kind of came out of. And so as we think about that, this is my family. So as you already heard, I have twins that are 16 years old, and they're in 10th grade. And then Carson is 13. And Carson is on the autism spectrum. He has what was previously diagnosed as Asperger's. And he is a super intelligent young man, and he loves electronics. He loves to play video games. He loves Minecraft, and he has a whole social group that he does with his technology and electronics. And if we let him, that's pretty much where he would spend most of his time. And yes, Grayson, our youngest, was a surprise. He came along unexpectedly. In fact, my wife and I, we, in our early years of our marriage, tried to have children and were not able to. And so we started to see some specialists, and it became very apparent that there were some issues there. And we were told we would not be able to have children naturally without the assistance of some sort of medical intervention. And so we did. We had some medical intervention. We had our 3 kids and continued on as if we weren't able to have children, as we were told. And about almost 10 years after Carson, Grayson appeared. So I thought my wife was joking when she first told me, but it was no joke. And so people say, well, it's nice having a little guy. It keeps you young. And the reality is it pretty much keeps me tired. So we love Grayson, but it's definitely a different life. And so a friend of ours, in fact, she is the director of our preschool at our church, and her husband, within 6 months of us, they had a little guy as well, and they were same age as us, and so our little guys are getting raised together here at the same time. And he was just telling me 2 days ago, he said, Dave, I think that our son spent 7 hours in front of a screen the other day just managing all the things that they have to do. He's a principal of a public school, elementary school and such. And so we know it's the easy thing. It's the quick thing to put students and children in front of a screen. But how can we do these things in a wise way in our homes? That's what I want to help you with today as we kind of go through our time together. You ask parents today about raising kids. I think we always are a little self-focused. And Barna did some research recently, and over 75% of parents say that raising kids today is more complicated than it was previously. I don't know how they come to those conclusions because we've never raised kids in previous generations. We're raising kids in this generation and today, but we have that perception at least. And I think it's true in some areas. And when asked, why do you think that is? Why do you come to that conclusion? 65% of them say that technology and social media is the reason. And really, if we think about it, Josh was talking, and I do actually a full presentation just on all the things that have changed over the years technology-wise. And similar to Josh, when I grew up, we didn't have a computer in our house, at least not like we have today. My dad had a home business, so he had a TRS-80 computer that took cassettes. It made that kind of weird noise as it processed data, but you couldn't really do anything interesting on it. We got an Atari when I was early teen, and then sometime around my college years, we got AOL and the internet, and that world was opened up into our home. So I was exposed as a child to pornography through a neighbor and through a magazine. But for me to access that or to regularly come in contact with that was not a usual common thing. And it was something that if I wanted to find that type of material, I had to seek it out in some way. Where today, our children are exposed to pornography. They say the average age is 11 years old of first exposure to pornography, and it's getting lower every year. And so the reality is our kids just grow up in a totally different world than we did because of the technology, what's at their fingertips. Just looking at the last few weeks of school, what we're able to do is amazing, and it's a great thing. It's all because of technology that wasn't there when we were in school. If we would have went through a pandemic like this, there wouldn't have been the options to educate our kids in the same way that schools are trying to do now with computers and those Chromebooks and such. And so the world is changing, and it's hard to keep up with all this technology and to manage social media and what our kids are doing on their devices. And so in light of that, how do we as parents keep on top of these things? Well, the fact that you're here tells me that you already probably understand that it's our responsibility as parents. That Joshua chapter 24 and verse 15 gives us that often quoted verse. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And we have to, as parents, be faithful in our own homes to honor God with the choices we make around media and around our technology and devices. And so we need to, as Proverbs says, teach our sons, and we need to instruct our children. We need to give them guidance and direction in this area. And I am often heartbroken by the number of young people that are in families with parents that go to church each week that are Christian families that they don't give any direction or supervision or oversight and instruction in these areas. And I see that as a principal of a junior, senior high school. I see that as a pastor in a church. I see the destruction that it's causing in the lives of young men and young women both, and can tell you horror stories of just unmanaged screen time and some of the results in young people's lives. And when parents find out, it's often too late to spare them from some of the heartache that they're now facing. And so that's why in Ephesians chapter 6, Paul admonishes us to bring up our children in the instruction and correction of the Lord. And, the Bible's relevant no matter where we are in the world. It's relevant no matter what age we live in. And I don't think Paul imagined probably the cell phone technology age we find ourselves in. But we need to nurture, instruct, and admonish or correct our children around this area and train them up wisely. And so here's some things that I just want to challenge us with as some general principles, and we're going to get real specific towards the end with some tools. But we need to develop an awareness about what our children are doing. We need to hold them accountable. And like I said, it breaks my heart to see parents that have no idea what their kids are doing on their phone and where they're going, and they haven't gotten themselves up to speed. And so there's no accountability. And if we're going to put a device in our children's hands, if we're going to put a device in our homes, whether it's a television, whether it's internet access to different devices, a tablet, a cell phone, any of these things, if we're going to put them in our kids' hands, we need to know what they're doing, what's the device capable of doing, and then hold our kids accountable in those areas. And then in doing this, how do we do it? Well, I think it starts with the dialogue with your kids. Ask them questions. Even as the little guys, when they're children, what is it that they get excited about? What are they looking to do when they get on that device? What are some of their favorite things? If they're on YouTube or whatnot. And of course, every family has different rules, restrictions, what's acceptable, not acceptable. But ask them, who are some of your favorite YouTube personalities? And you'd be surprised at their answers and the things that they like to do. What do you like to do if you're, on the internet? What kind of things do you like to get involved in? And then even do some of those things with them. Watch with them a little bit. Show some interest. And it's also a good way to find out, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Play their video games a little bit with them. Gain knowledge about technology. Don't bury our heads in the sand. We need to get up to speed, because this is the world that our kids live in, and it's going to continually change, and it's changing ever quickly, even more quickly than it was previously. And so get yourself up to speed so that you can be helping your children manage these things. And then monitor your kids' devices. It's been said in many times before that what we inspect communicates what we expect. Keep track of what's going on your kids' devices. And as I said before, we're going to get to some tools that are going to help you do that. Develop some policies that support the biblical principle of purity. Talk to your kids about why these things are important. Not just the what, just the rules, but also the why behind the rules. Why do we have these rules in our home? What is it that we're looking to accomplish? And why is that important? What are those biblical principles that support these things? I think we went through, in some of our Christian circles, we went through a season, at least where I kind of grew up. Maybe this wasn't your experience, where we learned a lot of the what's, a lot of the rules, a lot of the expectations, but there wasn't always a whole lot of teaching on the moral why, the reasons behind those things. And so it was very easy for some in my generation to walk away from the church, walk away from some of those principles, some of those teachings, because they never understood the why. It was always about a rule or an expectation. And we want to teach our kids, there are some limits, some lines in the sand that mom and dad have set, but here's why. Here's the purpose behind those. Here's what we're looking to accomplish. We want to honor God. And we go through in one of the sessions and just talk that through and talk about what are those principles and how do we communicate those with our kids. Because it's our responsibility to teach our children the Word of God, and then apply the Word of God in our homes in as much of a consistent fashion as we can. So those are always our goals. We're going to determine to take a stand for our child's good and for God's glory. And again, the fact that you're here, I'm preaching to the choir, I think most likely. Most of you are probably already on board and want to do these things well in your home. But you're going to find that it's not a popular thing. It doesn't make you popular even with all of your contemporaries in your community and in the church. They're going to say that you're too uptight. You're going to find that your kids are going to push back. No kids like more rules and limitations in these areas around technology, but it's our responsibility. And so let's learn how to use this technology. Let's learn the tools that we need to in order to accomplish these tasks. And let's do that together. So I'm going to give you some rules. These are my kind of rules in our home. These don't have to be replicated in your home. I'm not here in some fashion saying that these are the biblical rules for dealing with technology, but these are some good, I think, recommendations, some good starters for how to use technology in our homes in a real practical way. And the first thing is only allow screen time in public places. You know, that kind of eliminates a whole lot of things by making sure that that computer, the tablet, the cell phone, whatever is taking place is going to be more likely wholesome and appropriate when it's being done where other people are around and it's in a public place. It doesn't mean that it has to be in the living room where everybody's at the same time, but it could be, the dining room and the kitchen and some public area where people are coming and going. It's not in a bedroom. It's definitely not up in a bed, in the corner. But we're doing those things out in the public area of our homes. And then filter the internet. We're going to talk about how to do this, but I am shocked when I talk to parents, good-hearted parents, that have no filter on the internet that's coming into their home. Simple filters aren't perfect, but they're going to block a large majority of the issues. And are there ways? I've had parents say, yeah, but there's ways around filters, so I don't know what the point is. Well, there's ways around filters, but at least you're blocking it from accidentally jumping up on your child's screen. And if your child is going to go around those things, they have to do it intentionally. Whatever filter you might find, you say, well, there's a way around this one or that one. Then we're dealing with a hard issue, and we are going to be dealing with something different. But at least we're not having accidental exposures, and we're blocking things on a regular basis in our home, and especially on our devices that we hand to our children. Excuse me. We're going to talk about accountability software, and I recommend that you use that on all your family's devices. And I mean all. It's good for mom and dad to be accountable to each other. It's good for the kids to have some accountability so you know where they're going when they're on a device. You can see what they're using, and we'll get to some tools that'll help you to do that. But I think that's a very wise thing in the world in which we live. And enable safe search and pop-up blockers. As child uses a device, there's easy ways to turn on those safe searches. You can turn on Google Safe Search. You can add pop-up blockers to your browsers that they're using, both on mobile devices and on the computer. Do a little homework, figure out, okay, how do I enable that, and then do it so that at the very least you're using the basic filtering that's available on the devices. As your kids get a little older, you start to have the question about social media, Instagram, Facebook, all of those things. What are you going to allow your kids to use and not use? Get yourself knowledgeable about those things. What are the dangers and the risks, and what are the factors that are going to be involved in that decision? Sit down and talk through those things. It's different in every home. A lot of my students in our school have Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat, and now TikTok is very popular in many of our kids. These are Christian parents, Christian homes, and they have all of those. Other students don't have a cell phone at all. Their parents don't allow them to have a cell phone. Our kids have a cell phone. We monitor and manage their devices. They're on Facebook, but I require them to give me the password to their Facebook account. I'm one of their friends. That's a requirement. And so I see every chat that goes back and forth because I'm logged into their account just as they are. And I also can see who they're communicating with and what they're posting and those kinds of things. We've chosen not to allow them to be on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. There's some issues there, some concerns for us and our family. But you need to think those things through and then have some sort of accountability with them. And the great way is to have the passwords so that you can manage those and even shut them down if necessary. And obviously, one of the areas here to be aware of is students sometimes will set up a secondary account that the parents don't know about. So I can see those things because I'm managing the device as well. And I'm going to show you a couple tools that will help you to recognize those things. And then set a schedule in your home and block the internet access at specific times. So it's going to be different for every home. In our home, for instance, the internet goes off for certain devices. So we block it at the device level. So certain devices get shut off at certain times. So my younger son, who's 13, his devices get turned off at an earlier hour than his older brother and sister. Their devices get turned off. And then what devices get turned off is nice as well. And again, I'm going to show you how you can do that with certain tools. But so all their video games and TVs get turned off, but their school Chromebooks might stay on a little later. And so we can set those schedules. We can turn things off at dinner time, in the mornings. if somebody's, having trouble because they're getting on their devices and wasting time, so they're late to school or things like that, you could block the internet altogether in the morning. So you determine your family schedule, what's appropriate. You can do that for the whole internet. The whole internet turns off for everybody at certain times or certain devices, which is nice to do it more granularly when you get into the smart homes nowadays. So certain devices in your home might need internet access to do certain things, and you don't have to turn it off for all of those devices, only the devices that are the ones that are needed to be. And then set some daily time limits. Be creative around this. I know a lot of parents will say you can't use your device until after the homework's done. That's a great starting point. Maybe during these days while you're home and you have a lot more time at home, you say when the homework, schoolwork, whatever that looks like where you're at right now, and then these particular chores are done, then you get X amount of time for the day. And if you want to earn extra time, here's a list of other duties or responsibilities, whether it's, read a book or playing outside for a certain amount of time or certain chores, and you can earn some extra time, set up some charts like that. And so whatever works for you in your home, but have a policy. What are your daily time limits? And you can always flex. You can break your policy as the parent, but at least there's some sort of expectation in that you're following through with, and that you've set that as a priority in your home. And then talk to your kids. We've already mentioned regularly talk to your kids about their internet usage. What's going on? What are they seeing? What are they doing? And you'd be surprised. Kids are generally going to be transparent, especially if when they're younger, you start those conversations and it's not an abnormal thing in your home. So have those regular conversations. I think it's a bigger key to things than people think, because a lot of parents, they put a lot of restrictions and they have time schedules and they have accountability and they have software in place, but they're not talking to their kids. And so then the kids feel very much like it's a control thing. And while there may be some of that involved, when you're having regular conversations and a good relationship with your kids and you're going back and forth about these things and explaining why and listening to them about why they want it. My daughter wants very much to be on Instagram, so I had her explain to me why. My son wanted to play a particular video game. He wasn't allowed to. And I said, give me, 3 reasons why dad's wrong. And let's have a conversation. You share with me. And we had some dialogue and we talk about those things. And so spend the time to really have those conversations, and then set your expectations, set the rules. And then what are the consequences? So what happens when we go around those things? And we violate those expectations. I think this is just like anything else in the home. If we don't have some consequences and don't follow through on them, then what's the point of having the expectations in the first place? And so that's where it's the not so fun part of parenting sometime. And then this one's a tough one, because I think it applies to mom and dad as much as to our kids. And that's have a policy that we're not going to use the internet without a clear purpose. We're not just surfing the net. I'm not just going to jump on Facebook just to see what I can see. And if I do, I'm going to say I'm going to do it for 15 minutes, or I'm going to do it for a certain period of time. Otherwise, you've been there. You find yourself 2 or 3 hours later, and you haven't really accomplished much of anything, and you've went down the black hole of the internet from click to click to click to click. And that's where we find ourselves sometimes in dangerous places. One, it could be inappropriate content, but even on the other side is just wasting time and not using our time wisely, not being good stewards of it. So let's look at some particular tools that we can do some of these things with. That's probably going to be as helpful as anything. First, let's look at some accountability software that's available to you. And depending on what device it is that you are wanting to use. But what accountability software typically does, Covenant Eyes is my go-to for filtering. I'm going to give you several other options. And each of these have different price plans and different options within them. But what it does is you put a piece of software, you install that on whether it's the laptop or the desktop or the tablet or the cell phone. Covenant Eyes works basically with all those devices. So whether you have an iPad or an Android phone or an iPhone or a desktop computer, laptop computer, all of those devices, you install a piece of software. That software, once it's installed, can't be uninstalled without calling Covenant Eyes and going through a little bit of a process, and that's intentional. It's to basically offer some accountability. That's the first thing that it does. So every place that you go on that particular device, it's being tracked. And if you go someplace that is questionable, it's going to rank those pages and it's going to send them to whoever you have it set up to send to. So if it's a child's device, it can be sent to a parent. If it's you as a man or woman, you could have it sent to your spouse or to another accountability partner. And so it's a report that they get, and then they can ask you or talk to you about anything that looks questionable in that report. It has a little ranking system. The other thing that it has, if you enable it, is filtering. So it will filter access on those particular devices. And it does in different ways depending on the particular device. And some devices, it locks you down to a particular browsers. So you can't use just any browser. You're locked into a particular browser that's being filtered. And so it's going to filter then the connections on that particular device alone. So the pros of Covenant Eyes are that it does give accountability. So it's great on your kid's cell phone device or their tablet or their computer that they're using. And it's filtering those devices. The negative of these software is that it only works on the device that it's installed on. So if I go to another device in the home, I bring in a device from outside, and I go on to it, that's not being filtered and it's not being monitored. So this only works on the devices it's actually installed on. And there's several others out there. And so I'll make mention of those as well. Accountable to You is another organization that does basically the same thing. Ever Accountable is a third one. And then X3 Watch, online accountability for each device. All four of those offer that accountability and filtering on a device and send you some sort of report. And they've got some minor feature differences and some pricing differences potentially there, so you can check those out. My go-to one has been Covenant Eyes. They've been around for the longest and are constantly innovating. So if you're going to pick one and just go with it, that's where I would recommend. But they're all worth checking out. They all do a good job and do it just a little bit differently. Another one that you can install now on a device, and it offers some accountability at a little bit different level, is Bark. What Bark does is it's primarily for student devices, primarily their cell phones. And what it's going to do is it's going to use AI, and it's going to watch that device. And so whenever a student is texting and they're receiving messages or sending messages that are concerning, Bark's going to basically alert you as a parent. So it's going to tell you that it looks like suicide or it looks like inappropriate, sexual. So there's different filters that you're going to choose and set up. And when those kinds of things are triggered, it's going to give you a warning to check those out. You're going to be able to look and see if what's going on that device is, in fact, troublesome or not. So it does give some false alerts, but I think overall it's not going to bombard you with those. Like if your son or daughter, I've had this where my son was texting someone and said, "Ugh, I want to die," and so it alerts that as suicide concern. And so, but I'd rather have the false alert when it's not a reality than have it not there. And so that's another tool that you can layer in as well, and does a pretty good job there at some accountability there. On the realm of filtering the devices, there's lots of ways to do this. So we're going to talk through some of the most common ways, and then I'll even pause because right here's a time where there's often lots of questions before we go farther, Josh. So be ready for that. We'll talk a little bit about filtering, then take some questions on that. But the best way to filter inside of your home is through the router itself. So some routers have more features than others, but almost all routers have some sort of built-in parental controls. So for instance, my home, we have pretty good internet because I'm right across the street from our church and school. And so we just kind of piggyback off of that. But the last few weeks, a lot of teachers have been in their classrooms creating videos and such for distance learning. And we have something in our town, like a lot of places around the country, they offered some free internet during the school shutdowns. So we signed up for that so I could get some dedicated internet for our kids to use for their schoolwork. So in doing that, the router that they gave us, just the basic router that came from Charter, I logged on to that, just checking it out, and it has parental controls built right into it. And so it can turn on and off at particular times. It's not as robust, but it has some of those features in it. The router that we use, again, it's not the only one that does this, but I'm just familiar with it. We use the Google router, the Google Wi-Fi, the little puck-looking things there. And so what you can do is you can log into your, in this case, it's an app. It's the Google Wi-Fi app. And when you log into that app, you can set up lots of different things. I am very, very happy with the different options. So I talked about earlier, I can set up all of the devices and put them in groups, and I can have certain groups turn on and off, and I can pause them, just go in and pause it whenever I want, but I can also set up schedules. So I have all of the TVs and video games, they're on a schedule. They shut off Monday through Friday at a certain time. They shut off on the weekends on a certain times. I can set their school Chromebooks, which are filtered through the school already. So they already have some protection in those that's a little different, and they sometimes have late night work they can work on. I can leave those on a little later at night, but I can still shut down the TVs, the video games, the cell phones. I can shut down all of those devices. And it also has some features in there where I can choose to put everything in groups and make it really, really easy. So most routers today, if they're anything of an advanced router, are going to have features that you can go in there and automatically set up those schedules to turn things on and off. But on the filtering end of things, what you're going to want to use, we're going to give multiple options, but what we use in our home is an IP address. So we're going to go in and you're going to set the DNS entry, and it's going to go to either, there's multiple different ones out there. OpenDNS is one that was very popular for a long time. And in OpenDNS, basically, when I change my DNS setting in the router, which again, when you sign up for one of these things, there's free versions that will do it. You're going to just plug that new DNS entry into your router settings, and it's going to then begin filtering through OpenDNS. And you get to set those filters however you choose to do it. And so at the router level is the first and most basic way to start filtering inside of your home. But remember, similarly to the limitation of putting accountability and filtering software on a device, this is only going to filter whatever internet activity is taking place inside of your home. So what do we do when the devices are outside of the home? And so I'm going to skip this for now. But when we're talking about our cell phones, Apple has some built-in tools that you can get into, and you can set up limits on what apps can be used and how long they can be used and what apps can be blocked, which apps can be allowed. And so there are some tools inside of your devices already, and you can go in there and use what's called the screen time tools and set those up on an iPhone. All right. So this is at the device level. So I can get my child's device and I set it up as a child's device in Apple Screen Time, and then I can start to manage and monitor their device inside of there. For children, here's my go-to tools. So you have a child at home and you want to give them a device to use, a tablet, whether it's an Android tablet, an iPad. This is before they get into the cell phone age. I use Screen Time. So Screen Time is going to allow you to manage that device. And by manage the device, we mean you can set up so that anytime they want to add an app to that device, so they try to add a new game or a new application, it's automatically blocked until mom or dad on their app on their phone enable it. So you control what apps they can actually install, and you control which apps they can use. So you can go through and turn off apps. You can do that all of the time. So you could say they're never allowed to use YouTube. And you can also set up time frames. So certain apps can only be used at certain times. So you could have a school schedule, a home schedule, whatever. You can block things at certain times of the day. You also have a shutdown button where you can just pause their device so they can't use it at all whenever you choose to. You can set a schedule for that device so it turns off at night, turns back on in the morning. It has school time settings that turn certain parts of the device off while they're at school. So you have full control of your children's devices. So when our kids were younger, and some of them still are, this is what we use to manage their devices. So we can see anytime they go on to an app, it tells us, gives us a little rundown. We can see how long they've used it, how long they've used every app. And here's the cool part. I get to set some time limit. So I can say they can use these apps, count towards the time. And whenever they use those apps, it's adding up their time, and they get a 2-hour limit for the day, for instance. I could set whatever time. And when they reach that amount of time, they can't go in anymore. It locks them out. So there's no fight about it. I don't have to say, you've got 15 more minutes. You got 5 more minutes. Time's up. Let me finish. I just want to finish. Because screen time warns them that it's about to run out of time. And when it runs out, it just doesn't work. It shuts them down. They're locked out of those apps that you have put in there. So it's a great tool for managing cell phones, tablets, and those types of devices for the younger children. As your kids get a little older and they get into a cell phone, my kind of go-to device tool, for those devices is the Guardian. It's not perfect. I don't love the layout. It's not as pretty, but it does what needs to be done. So it does all of the things I just told you that screen time does on that cell phone, but it also has features for monitoring texts. So I see every text that comes and goes on my child's device. I see every phone call they make, which isn't very many. Most kids don't make too many phone calls anymore. But I see every text that goes back and forth. It alerts me if they say anything in a text, kind of like bark. It warns me. Not just text now. I can also see Facebook Messenger messages. It tracks those as well. So I have the ability to shut the phone down. I have the ability to check the GPS location to find out where they're at a particular given time. I can turn apps on and off just like I could with screen time. So it adds that extra functionality of the phone / text / messaging world monitoring and seeing into that, as well as it has a browser filter. So I could set some filtering on that device. And that the difference with this is it goes with them wherever their device goes. So it's not just a filter in my house. It's a filter wherever they're at. It's going to be now a filtered internet. And I can set that as strict or as loose, and I can blacklist, whitelist sites as well. So those are a couple of my go-tos in the filtering world. So at this time, we'll pause before we jump to the rest of things and take just any questions about the filtering side of things, Josh.
Yeah, we had one from Evelyn. She asked this: whoever had the cell phone number before my preteen had their phone must have welcomed inappropriate texts, because we ran into a lot of inappropriate texts being sent on my child's phone. We called AT&T and they gave us the app to put on it, but wondering if there's anything better to do. So is that blocking a number or Guardian, or what would you recommend there?
Yeah, you can block the number. The challenge with blocking the number is that blocking the number would work, but if the child unblocks the number while they have the device, right? So there's no guarantee that it would remain blocked. There are spam filters, so you can make sure you're on the no call list and that you've turned on any spam filtering. But on the text side of things, the best thing would be like an Guardian, where you can at least monitor and see what's coming and going. The temptation there for the child would be, though they didn't invite it, it's coming in, and would they access it and then quickly delete it so mom and dad don't see it later? Where with Guardian, you're going to at least, if it's not blocking it, you're going to see everything that's going on. And that's kind of the transition, right? So when we have our younger kids, we have a whole lot of stuff blocked. Everything's filtered. We give them the cell phone. That's how we start out. Now that they're 16, we're moving in that, as they're getting a little older here, there's a few more things that I kind of open up a little bit and then monitor and watch because I can see everything. And so they know the rules, they know the expectations, and they know mom and dad are watching. And my hope is that they're going to make wise decisions. And if they don't, we're there to have a conversation. And we've had to have some of those conversations. My 16-year-old, he has a girlfriend. He's not allowed to have a girlfriend, but you might as well just say he has a girlfriend because he's got someone that, he likes, she likes him, they text. So what's the rules? How many texts? What should you be saying or not saying in those kinds of conversation? What's appropriate and inappropriate? So we've had to have some of those conversations. But the nice thing is I can see the conversation taking place. Dad can then follow up and have a conversation with him about those things. So that's the big benefit of like Guardian. And then there's a few others I'll show you here in a second is the monitoring. Because every filter has a workaround somewhere that someone might figure out, but they can't get around that everything's seen.
Yeah, so in this case, Evelyn just said it was kind of spam that couldn't be blocked. Is it a case where at some point you just get a new number then? If
you could get a new number, but if you look at your phone, again, different phones have different settings and such, but there's a way to just block numbers. Typically, you can long press the number, and usually the option pops up, block this number. So if it's the same number over and over again, you could block that number on the phone.
Okay. All right. Evelyn, if you still have some questions, maybe can connect you with David afterwards.
Other questions around filtering in particular, or I guess almost anything else? All right, we'll carry on. If you do have a question, Josh can interrupt anytime. On the filtering realm, in monitoring, MobiSip is another one that is quite popular out there. I prefer Guardian, but that's because in my home, we don't have the need to monitor and filter a huge number of devices. Our school Chromebooks that the students use at our school is what my kids use. So it's already filtered, monitored. But if you have multiple devices, laptops, iPads, cell phones, MobiSip works across various devices. Guardian's particularly geared towards the cell phone world. So if you have multiple devices and you want to control those types of features, MobiSip is a tool you'd want to look at, as well as Custodio is more in the cell phone world, but they've got some of those tools. Again, all of these have different price points and a few different tweaks and features. So that's why I just make you aware that there's not just one tool out there. I tell you the kind of ones that we prefer, but you may like a different one. If you're using a Chromebook in particular, Bloxy is great for Chromebooks. It allows you, they have a real simple process you walk through, but it makes it so that basically that Chromebook has filters and time restrictions and all of those things onto that Chromebook. And Chromebooks are their own little animals, and so Bloxy is the best tool we found for the home market. We use Guardian. A lot of people are familiar with Guardian in the school, but they don't have a home parent version of Guardian. So Bloxy is going to be your best tool to monitor, filter, and manage a Chromebook for a child in your home, if that's your go-to device. And for price reasons, a lot of people are in the Chromebook world these days. Some other useful resources. We talk about having conversations with your kids and getting yourselves trained up about these things. And things change all the time. I saw someone had a question, I think earlier, if I saw it in the text, about TikTok. TikTok wasn't even that big of a thing not that long ago. And now suddenly it's very, very popular. Protect Young Eyes is a great place to get some teaching, some training. They keep up with what's going on in the digital world. They're affiliated in some ways with Covenant Eyes, so just have a great reputation coming from even a biblical perspective in some of their materials. So just a good tool. The issue with TikTok, since someone had asked, I forgot to mention earlier, I did see that question come across. TikTok has a multiple problems, but the biggest one is that I would describe it as digging through the trash can to find something worthwhile. It's not that everything on there is inappropriate or that everybody is using it for inappropriate purposes, but there's so much junk. In particular, there's not pornography, but there's all but pornography and inappropriate dancing, gyration that tends to be, these young ladies putting their stuff out there, and it beyond just the inappropriateness and the content, it's also self-image and body image issues I see with teenage young girls. It portrays for them this idea that this is what they're supposed to look like and try to look like in looking to achieve, and it's just not a helpful tool, I found. Common Sense Media is a great tool it's going to give you reviews about different media tools, so you can look up what's going on, what is TikTok, other apps, as well as TV shows, movies, all kinds of entertainment that come in through the screen, and you have questions about it, or video games. It's going to rate them and rank them, but more than just give you some kind of score, it's going to tell you all the details that you need to know as a parent, the pros, cons for that. InternetMatters.org is a great organization that's going to give you some tools around digital citizenship, keeping your kids safe on the internet. They're constantly updating that material, so just a great resource. You could spend a lot of time there and educate yourself around these matters. Then talking to our kids. How do we talk to our kids? Some of this is just about purity, about don't want to overuse or misuse that word, but we're talking about keeping our minds clean and being careful what we look at and having a biblical perspective in those things. And starting early, the book God Made All of Me just kind of starts to give you the idea that God made us and what is it to be created in God's image, and start to give those discussions. Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is a great book for those preteen years, the late elementary. When kids are starting to get on devices, they're starting to have the potential to see something inappropriate. Again, this may be a situation where you're fully filtering everything, but something gets through, something pops up, they're at a friend's house. There's so many different ways that a young person today could be exposed to pornography. And what are they going to do when they see that, when they come across it for the first time? So this helps you as a parent have that conversation, defining for them what is a bad picture and what do we do when we see those things? Who should we tell about it? And why is this important? So it's kind of having that pre-conversation with your kids. It's a great tool for that. Then The Princess and the Kiss is a book for young girls, and it's about the idea of purity. And it's just a great little story. And it does it in a story format and gives you some principles from that story that you could have a discussion around and talk about those things with your daughter. There's also a version for young boys that parallels that. The Ultimate Girl's Body book is again, from a Christian perspective, understanding how God made us. And today, unfortunately, with the media and this gender fluidity, and none of us are male or female, we're all on a spectrum. I think it's even more important that our kids at an early age, we have age-appropriate conversations around these things so they have right thinking around these areas. And then for you, this isn't for your children, but it's for you to be prepared to have these conversations. And, thinking back when we were kids, I don't know what your experience was, but when I've talked to people my age and even younger about the conversations their parents had with them around sexuality, around pornography, around some of these issues, they weren't necessarily there. They didn't have those conversations. And so now they're not sure, how do I have that? How do I do that? What's the best way? And again, as we already said today, it's even more necessary to talk about things that before weren't even necessarily being considered. And so this book's a great intro for you as mom and dad. How do I have those conversations and to give a gospel-centered approach to those things. And then these 3 books I have here on the screen as well. Luke and his wife, Tricia Gilkerson, they were with Covenant Eyes for a long time. And they wrote some books, kind of almost like workbooks. They've got some different things in there. They've even got some pictures and such to talk to your kids as they go through different stages. There's one called The Talk, and the Talk is for the younger kids. And it's got about biblical sexuality. So it's from a Christian worldview. And then the one, Changes, is all about going into puberty and having a conversation about what is puberty, what does that mean, what's taking place. And then around the a little bit older, getting into those teenage years, is 11 lessons to give kids a greater understanding of biblical sexuality. And so all of these are from a biblical perspective, from a biblical worldview. And so they're great tools to have those conversations. And those conversations then lead to conversations about this is why it's important what we look at. And the world's wanting to give us messages that are counter to a biblical perspective and a biblical worldview. And so that's why mom and dad are concerned about what you see and where you go on the internet, and can have those conversations with them. Great book just around the technology area. Andy Crouch wrote a book, The Tech Wise Family, and it's going to give you some principles. It's not a whole bunch of tools and how-tos, but mostly give you some principles and some things to be thinking about around technology and how it's changed our lives and how it's controlling our lives and our homes, some of the pitfalls and dangers and how we might avoid those. Then just kind of lastly, on a personal note, my son, as I said, is starting to like a girl for the first time, and he's 16 years old. And so we go to breakfast we used to before we were quarantined, but we go to breakfast on Saturday, and another dad and his son, about the same age as my son. And we went through this book, The Young Man's Guide to Awesomeness. It actually had a little video that went with every lesson that the guys could watch ahead of time, read the little chapter, and then some discussion questions. Those questions were, they're based on the life of David and some of the issues that he had around the area of immorality and how we can avoid those things and avoid the consequences of those things, and why those things are important. What we look at is important. How we treat young women is important, and how to have integrity, and then how to get an identity in Christ and look towards the future and be the man of God that he would have us to be. Another book around those types of topics is Father-Son Accountability. Again, these are for men and their sons, and just wanted to share those tools from a personal reference that have been really, really helpful in having that conversation with my son. And you say, what does that have to do with technology? Almost all of those issues and these things that these books are helping us have these conversations around, many parents that I run into that are having problems around the technology area are reacting. And they're deciding, now's time, I better have a conversation about these things, because now my kids are seeing things or have been exposed to things through technology, through the internet. And so my advice is, have those conversations ahead of time so that you can help them when they come across those things to respond in a right way, be monitoring, holding them accountable, and you're much more likely to have success and not have the heartbreak stories that I have to sit across the desk from, because there's been no conversations, there's been no accountability, there's been no monitoring or filtering going on, and suddenly there's a crisis. And we don't have time to go through those heartbreak stories, but they're very real. They're not just on 2020 or Dateline. They're very real situations that our Christian families are facing. And so I hope this has been a help to you. It's kind of hard to throw in an hour what we do in a 5-hour time frame. So, if you're looking for a specific question answered, you can ask today, right now. If something comes up later, feel free to send me an email, d.warren@cbamidland.org. And I'll post that in the chat as well, because I see it's covered up maybe for some of you. And I'd be happy to see about once this quarantine ends, maybe in 2021 or something like that. We'll see what happens. God's in control. But to come to your church. And lately what I've been doing a lot of is actually working with schools as we get them set up to do remote learning and that kind of thing. But we do a 4 or 5 session workshop with parents around these things, and we can get a lot more hands-on and answer specific questions and do those things. So yeah.
Fantastic. So we're going to take a few moments here to do some Q&A, and want to thank everybody for joining us. Before you guys pop off, I wanted to let you know about a couple resources that Renewanation makes available, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. Renewanation has a free magazine. Sorry, I can't make this. We used to have an option to go full screen, but we have to look at the we offer this. You can order it on our website. This looks at articles specific to biblical worldview education, and it's our latest edition. Some fantastic articles in here. We offer this for free, and this can be delivered to your school. You just pay the shipping, your church, or your home. You can go and request that, order that on our website, renewanation.org. Want to encourage you to do that. It comes out twice a year, spring and fall. And then one of the books that Renewanation offers, called Preparing Children for Marriage. Sexuality and purity is in God's economy is based in marriage, sexuality specifically. And so we want to tie this into to God's world. This becomes very helpful, how to teach God's good design for marriage, sex, purity, and dating, and 18 studies for you to do with your children from the youngest of ages. So that may be helpful, can be found in the store at renewanation.org as well. So we had a couple questions, and if you want to keep throwing those in the chat room, we can answer as many as we get for the time that we have. I'll start with one here just recently. So gentleman, Brian was wondering, what's a good rule of thumb for screen time limits for younger kids? We have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and maybe we could ask the same question for teens as well. And maybe you just give us some guidance on what you do with your kids.
Loaded question. So if you look at the studies that are out there, they're all over the board as far as the damage that screen time can do, or screen time doesn't really do any damage. So you can find studies to support either side of those positions, no screen time or unlimited screen time. And obviously, as Christian parents, we want to be wise and look at that data. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a parental decision. And I think that you have to recognize one big piece is that all screen time is not equal. And so being cautious, not just to set a time limit, but also a content. What content are we talking about? 2 hours of YouTube is very different than 2 hours of some sort of educational resources versus 2 hours of video games. So I'm not assuming that you mean for entertainment purposes after schoolwork is done that needs to have some sort of screen time involved with that. So in our home, our son, who is middle school age, I'll start there. He is allowed, and it's on the high side for some families. I get that. And so that's why it's like so different for each kid in each home situation and what the students are involved in outside of the home and all of those activities. He has a maximum of 2 hours that he spends in screen time in the evening. And that's not often achieved. By that, I mean, that would be the maximum. But many nights he's not home for 2 hours, or by the time he does homework and he does youth group or life group or those kinds of things, in certain evenings it doesn't happen at all. But that would be the maximum, is 2 hours for him. Our younger one, we try to limit to about an hour a day in front of the screen. That's during a normal school week. I will admit and be honest that this past week there have been more than an hour a day has taken place in front of a screen time, when mom's trying to do hangout meets and dad's at his office doing something and trying to manage all of that. It's very, very easy to make it the babysitter. So that's why I say I caution not just the amount of time, but then if you're going to use it and you're going to have those moments where it's going to be a tool that's going to help us to occupy a child for some period of time, managing the content is equally as important as it is the amount of time.
So how about for your younger ones? Did you say for your 3-year-old, what
time? Yeah, 1 hour for our 3-year-old.
Yep. Okay. Autumn asked, how How do I find all the ways that kids can get around screen time limits? YouTube is our biggest culprit.
So, if you're talking about in your home, the easiest thing to do is to go into your router settings. And again, I would walk you through it, but every router is different. So it's not like, oh, just here's how you do that on the router. Every router is a little bit different, but you can almost every router nowadays, if you go into the settings, there's going to be some place where you can block a URL. So you can just block YouTube altogether from your home. And you could do that for all of the time, or you could, once there's a limit reached. So in our particular situation, we have that at the granular level as well. So I actually have YouTube blocked on my son's and daughter's cell phones. So YouTube's only available on certain devices in our home. So there's multiple kind of layers there to that question and answer, depending what device you're talking about, depending on what software you choose to use. If you use Screen Time, if you use Guardian, use any of those tools, you're going to be able to block the app entirely. Or you could set up YouTube to be on a list of apps that could only be used for a certain period of time and for a certain amount of time. So you could have a 2-hour time limit on YouTube, these 4 game apps. And once that time limit is met, then it shuts down that particular device. Obviously, if there's other devices involved, then you're going to have to do that on each of those devices and or do it at the router level so that it's not able to come through at all if you're trying to block it.
Yeah, we use Circle, and we have the ability to just actually put YouTube's off limits unless they watch it with us on one of our devices. Okay, so
a DNS approach, Clean Browser, is one that's, I think it's like $5 a month. But if you put Clean Browser, let me look it up really fast. Clean Browsing DNS. I'll put a link in for you here.
I don't put a link in it. It kills it.
Okay. If you go to cleanbrowsing.com, is it .com? Yeah, .org, cleanbrowsing.org, and you can input inside of, and it walks you through so you don't have to remember any instructions, but it tells you there's a free version. You can click and use the family settings. So that means you don't get to set it yourself, but that turns on safe search. It turns off, it turns on YouTube restrictions and things like that. But you could do it in that way as well, which lets you turn off YouTube, lets you turn off Reddit, lets you turn off Facebook or whatever ones you get to choose on-off switches for all of those different popular social media and such.
Yeah, okay. One of the listeners that joined us a little after we began said that she missed the response to concerns about TikTok. Wondered if you could just share what are the specific concerns that you've had with TikTok?
So TikTok has a high level of inappropriate content. So I found in a 2-day, just check it out, see what it's about, that for me, 90% of the content was inappropriate. It was a lot of young ladies that were scantily dressed, doing suggestive kind of things. And so obviously there's the issue of the inappropriate such stuff. And then I mentioned also just body image for young ladies. It puts out there that that's the goal. That's what we're looking for. And that's where their identity is found. And so for both of those reasons, I equate it to digging through the dumpster to find something valuable, to eat. It's not typically the place I would go. Doesn't mean I wouldn't find it if I dug long enough, but not a great place to look for it.
Yeah. Okay. We had somebody's looking for a list of the books that you mentioned. If they didn't take pictures of them all or furiously write, is it possible to get that from you? We can provide it in the email to them.
Yeah, Josh, you have that the first link I sent, either one of them, but you can share that.
Okay.
Yep.
So for those listening here, we'll provide that in an email tomorrow, and then for those listening at a later time, we'll just put it in the comment section on YouTube. Great. All right. Well, if that is all, we will thank you for joining us, and hope it's helpful, and blessings on your day. Thank you, David, as well.
You're welcome. Enjoy the day.